It's great to see everyone tonight as we come tonight to study the book of Daniel. And remember, what we're doing is encouraging people to read through the Bible. And tonight we have Shay and Austin. So let's jump right into this very deep book, only 12 chapters, but it is a very, very deep book. So, Sister Shay, would you like to read the first question?
I would love to. Who wrote the book of Daniel? When was it written? Where was it written from? And what were the circumstances of its writing?
Well, who would you guess wrote the book of Daniel?
What's his other name?
Belteshazzar.
Belteshazzar.
Okay. It's kind of ironic. You're not going to get this. We've got a lot to cover. But yes, Daniel did write the book of Daniel. So anyway, when was it written? Now, this is interesting that Daniel is taken captive in the 605 deportation, and he lives at least to the second year of the Median rulers, which would have been 536. So he writes this obviously somewhere near the very end of that time. Now, maybe he wrote other parts of it and recorded it and had it there for a long time, but the end of it would have had to have been, around 536. So anyway, and where was it written from? So where is it written from, do you think?
I would think Babylon.
Yes, Babylon, because when he was taken captive, Austin, in 605, he never went back to Jerusalem. And he lives to be probably at least 87, 88. And so, that's kind of a long time. But he never forgot. We're going to see in a minute, he never was anything but Jewish. He never worshipped anything but his God. And, the Babylonian culture did not transform him. And so the circumstances of his writing would have been at the end of a long and illustrious career. And Daniel, if the cream rises to the top, then Daniel's definitely the cream, because in two successive empires, three if you want to call it the Medo-Persian is two, but either 2 or 3 depending on how you consider Medo-Persian to be the same empire, which I honestly would. He rises to the top in at least 2 successive empires. It's pretty amazing if you think about it. Second command in 2 successive empires. And so God put him through these amazing tests, and he passed these tests. But they had to be kind of big for him to wind up, on the top. So, anyway, so that's a little bit about the background of Daniel. So read our second question, if you would, Shay.
According to Daniel chapter 1, verses 3 through 8, how did Nebuchadnezzar try to brainwash Daniel and his friends into becoming Babylonian? According to Daniel 1, verse 8, how did Daniel keep from being transformed by the Babylonian culture?
Okay, so they come in 605 BC. Nebuchadnezzar takes these guys. He puts them in training, tries to make them Babylonian. So we'll let Austin read 3 through 8, and it kind of tells us how Nebuchadnezzar, obviously the king of Babylon, tries to transform these guys into to becoming Babylonian.
Then the king ordered Asaph, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence, and in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and disconcerting knowledge, and who had ability to serve in the king's court. And he ordered them to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food, from the wine and drink appointed, that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now among them, from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, and Mishael. Is that, am I
Yes,
pronouncing that right?
Hananiah, Hananiah, Mishael, and Abednego.
Okay, Abednego. And then the commanders of the official assigned new names to them. Daniel was assigned the name of Belshazzar, and Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and Azar Abednego. But Daniel made up his mind he would not defile himself with the king's choice of food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he may not defile himself.
Okay, so these 4, there were others, but these 4 obviously. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, you notice something? Daniel's always referred to by his Hebrew name, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are always referred to by their Babylonian name, even though they remained faithful from what we can tell. But it's just kind of interesting that Daniel is always referred to by his Hebrew name. By the way, what does the name Daniel mean?
Ooh, I should know this, but I don't.
Okay, remember the L at the end? The L at the end would be what? God. Okay, God. Okay, there was a tribe, Dan, and the whole thing of what Dan is judge. Okay, judge and God. God is my judge. That's what it means. God is my. I love the meaning of that name as much as it's kind of like two of the names that probably the favorite meaning of those names would be Elijah, which means Yahweh is my God, and Daniel, which means God is my judge. I love those names and the meaning of those names. But anyway, so that's what, God is my judge. You think we'd be better off if we remember that God is our judge, not the world today?
I think we all need Daniel as our first name.
Yes, that's God is my judge. It doesn't matter what the world thinks about you. So God is my judge. That's what it means. So anyway, so Daniel is taken. Now, he's of noble background, royal descent. And remember, Nebuchadnezzar can try to make it. This is how you propagate an empire. You find the best and the brightest, if you go back, and this is a concept that was really understood in the Old Testament. Even Nebuchadnezzar and Aristotle and Plato will write about finding the best and the brightest, which only makes kind of sense. And we live in a weird world today in which we don't think we have to find the best and the brightest, but and we're going to pay for that. But at any rate, so Daniel comes, and so how did Daniel keep from being transformed? They were going to study the literature of the Chaldeans. They were in the king's personal service. So how did Daniel keep from being transformed, his friends, into becoming Babylonian, so to speak? What did they do? In verse 8, it says something. Read verse 8 again, and this is important. Read verse 8 again, if you would, Austin.
Okay, hold on. I got ready for the next question. I jumped ahead.
Okay. That he made a purposeful decision. Go ahead, read it.
But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice of food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he may not defile himself.
And he said, I'm going to eat Hebrew food. I'm not going to eat the wine. I'm not going to do this. And we're not going to take time. Remember, he went to the guy and he said, okay, just can we eat like Hebrews, like Jews? And the guy said, basically, let me interpolate what he says. Interpret what he says. He said, I could care less what you eat, but if the king sees you not looking good, I will forfeit my head to him. And no, and so we're not going to do that. And so Daniel said, okay, give me 10 days. Give us 10 days. Let us eat Hebrew food and just vegetables and drink water and stuff. And you see, and you make the judgment what seems right to you. If we look worse, fine. If we look better, fine. And, of course, after the end of 10 days, the Bible says their appearance was better than all the rest. So this is how Daniel, and his friends kept from being immersed into the Babylonian culture, and they maintained that. The Bible tells us not to test God, but so he was like, okay, what's the difference between testing God and allowing God to show the world through us when we kind of are faithful to him like Daniel was? What's the difference, do you think?
Attitude behind it?
Obedience.
Yeah. And it's always, you're both right. It's always the attitude. It's always it's always kind of the motivation. The intention, exactly.
As it says in the beginning, Daniel made up his mind. Before he even knew what the requirements were, he had made up his mind that he was going to honor God.
And let me ask you this question. When you make up your mind, does that make the decision later easier?
Absolutely.
Yeah. If you make up your mind, there's no question. There's no the internal struggle. Well, am I going to do what God says or not? If you make up your mind, hey, when you make up your mind, are you willing to deal with the consequences no matter what they are? Yeah, and I think that's really important, because, okay, you're giving God a chance, so. but it's really fascinating. Okay, let's look at the third question. So if you would read that, Shay.
In Daniel chapter 2, what event did God use to elevate Daniel? What was the interpretation of the dream and how was it fulfilled? Daniel 2, verses 46 through 49, how did Nebuchadnezzar respond to Daniel's God and what did he do for Daniel?
Well, let's set the stage, and then we will have Austin kind of read 2:46 through 49. But let's set the stage first. Okay. So, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And so this dream bothered him. He's going to have another dream that's going to bother him, but in chapter 4. But at any rate, so Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, and so he calls the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, the magi, the magicians, the magi. Magi, get that? Magi, okay. Time of Jesus, the magi come from the east. Can say something about that real quickly. Daniel probably put in the Babylonian magi, these magi of the east, the concept of looking for the coming Messiah, the Christ. So Daniel, what you're going to see this, and I'm going to jump ahead with this. They're trying to transform Daniel into Babylonian culture. They don't transform Daniel. Daniel, in some sense, transforms Babylon.
He's the thermostat, not the thermometer.
There you go. There you go. Okay, we're headed for a gold star.
Yay!
That is great. I love that. Thermostat, not the thermometer. Okay, that is great. That is wonderful. So anyway, so he has his dream. He calls all these guys together and said, tell me the interpretation, tell me the dream and the interpretation. Said, okay, great, Nebi. If you'll just tell us the dream, we'll tell you the interpretation thereof. And so he said, no, we're not playing that game, because I'll tell you the dream, and you'll come up with some cock and bull story, and I won't know whether it's true or not. And they said, no one can do what you're asked. No one can do this. So anyway, they round up. He said, well, fine, y'all are all going to be killed, because you know, all I'm doing is paying you guys to lie to me. Forget it, you know. And so anyway, he said, well, line up all the magicians, the soothsayers, the astrologers, all the wise guys, all the smart guys. Well, Daniel's not a soothsayer or a magician, but he is one of the smart guys. So they come to Daniel and say, okay, the captain of the bodyguard, Arioch, comes to him and says, okay, Daniel, you know, you guys are all going to be put to death because none of y'all can interpret what the king says. And he says to Arioch, why is the matter so urgent? And he basically says, because Nebuchadnezzar runs the whole world, and so he's just decided this, and so anyway, he's going to do it. So anyway, Daniel said, give me some time to pray. So Daniel goes out and prays, and he comes back and he says, I can tell you the dream. So he comes in, and he comes before Nebuchadnezzar and said, can you tell me the dream? And he said, there's not a man alive that can tell the dream, but there's a God in heaven who hears the prayers of men, and he has made known to me the dream. This is the dream, and here's the interpretation. So he starts off, and you kind of see Nebuchadnezzar sitting there, okay, and he said, this is the vision that you had. You saw a great statue with a head of gold, with a chest and thighs of silver, with a midsection of bronze, legs of iron, down to feet of iron mixed with clay. And you almost kind of see the impression that Nebuchadnezzar is sitting there, you know, it's like, okay, tell me the story. He's waiting for some other lie. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, the story, what do you think the expression on his face might have been like as he heard the dream he had expressed back to him? What do you think he might have kind of looked? Do you think he kind of like started sitting forward in his seat and everything?
Like anticipating his next
word.
word.
And he said, okay, and here's what the dream means. You are represented by the empire of gold. After you, another will arise, and then a third will arise, and then a fourth of iron, and then in the end there will be a final kingdom mixed with iron and clay. And then he said there was a rock cut out of a mountain without hands, and it destroyed the whole great big statue. And he tells him that these are successive empires. The head, Babylon, the shoulders, Medo-Persia, the bronze, Greek, the thighs of iron, Rome, and the final one of iron mixed with clay. And the 10 toes represents the 10 nations federated in the empire of the Antichrist. And what did the rock cut out of the mountain without human hands, what did that represent that consumed the whole world?
Christ's return?
Yet represents it represents the kingdom of Christ, his return, and that he would defeat all those and establish a kingdom which would go on forever. So he hears this. Okay, pick up in 46 through 49, if you don't mind, Austin.
Then the king Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and did homage to Daniel, and gave orders to present him an offering and fragrant incense. The king answered Daniel and said, "Surely your God is a God of gods, and Lord of kings, and revealer of mysteries, since you have been able to reveal this mystery." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, and made him ruler over a whole province of Babylon, and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. And Daniel made request of king, and appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and over the administration of province of Babylon, while Daniel was the king's court, was at the king's court.
Okay. So he rises to second in command. Kind of reminds you of Joseph in Egypt, and Daniel's basically running the show from this point on, as long as Nebuchadnezzar's in power. So, any rate, so how did Nebuchadnezzar respond to Daniel's God?
I think he was in awe, but at the same time, respectful of the fact that he's the God of gods. Yeah.
He must be the real deal.
Yep. And the proof is in the pudding.
Hey, I have a question real quick.
Yes.
So back when you were setting the stage for us and you said the chief was going around asking everybody, could they come and interpret the dream, was Daniel known prior to this for interpreting dreams?
Apparently not. Apparently this is the bust on the scene thing.
Okay, because my question to you is, it seemed like when I was reading it, that he knows all these people are going to be killed, and he doesn't go and pray. He tells, not first, he tells the guy, go tell the king, make an appointment for him that I'll come and tell him about his dream, when he's never interpreted a dream before at all, nor prayed, but then goes and prays in expectation that God's going to answer his prayer.
So what does that tell you about Daniel?
He believes and trusts that God's will is going to be done.
Yeah, and this ain't his first rodeo.
No, but I mean, I felt like, before he even went to God and prayed and said, is this what you want me to do? How do you want me to handle this? He answered and responded to the guy and said, hey, go tell the king, I'll interpret it, and then went to his dudes and they prayed and got the...
Remember why Daniel got thrown in the lion's den? Remember he prayed 3 times a day? He was in the habit of prayer, and obviously he'd seen a lot of answered prayers before. And obviously he knew something of God's purpose for his life, and he knew that this kind of probably would not be the end. And so, yeah, but you got it. That's
I just love that.
There's a tremendous confidence with Daniel. If humility is really the path to strength, Daniel shows this very well. His humility and there's a confidence with this guy that is unbelievable. I mean, it is.
But it's not cocky.
No, it's not cocky. It's not arrogant.
Yeah.
Well, how confident do you think you'd be if you got a sure message? I mean, it'd be.
But he didn't have the message yet. That's what I'm saying. He didn't have it yet.
But I think he's gotten them in the past.
Yeah,
Maybe not about that. And it's like, things are not built on, it's like, okay, dear God, I got a problem, help me. Well, a little late now to be screaming to me, isn't it? I mean, if you were seeking God, and that's what you get the impression with Daniel, he's known God, he's gotten answers to God before, and he's like, he's got a good, and he's calling the shots. He's directing what's going. Go tell Nebby I'll be there for a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of not an arrogant way, but it's like, okay, go tell him. Don't do anything until I talk to God, then I'll come and tell him what's going on.
And he just knew God was going to tell him what he needed to know.
But he's reversing the order of leadership.
Right.
He said, you wait, I got to talk to God first. I mean, it's pretty stunning if you think about it.
It is. That got my attention that he just told this chief person who's over all of them, you go tell him I'll be there shortly.
It's like, I knew a kid one time. This is not the example to follow. He was there. Anyway, he got in trouble with the principal. The principal sent him to class and said, The principal wants to see you. And I said, well, I tell you what, you go back and tell him he knows where I am. That guy's name was Mike. Mike said that didn't work out real well.
Yeah, I don't think that's the right order there.
He knows where I am. He
Yeah.
wants me to Oh, goodness. Things don't work out too good, do they? So, anyway, but Daniel's situation worked out very well. So let's jump to the next question, number 4, and we'll look at this.
He was very purposeful, too, not to take any of the credit.
Yes.
It's not me that is interpreting it. My God's telling you this.
Yep. Very true.
In Daniel chapter 5, verses 4 through 7, what did Belshazzar do when he saw the handwriting on the wall? What was the interpretation Daniel gave in verses 25 through 27? And why did Daniel refuse Belshazzar's gifts? What happened to the Babylonian Empire that very night?
I'm not much at all on pop culture, but Stevie Wonder had a song, remember, very superstitious writing on the wall. I have no idea what that song meant or anything, but I heard that one time and I thought about this, that, wow, that's kind of a neat, the handwriting on the wall. And, you see this kind of as a thing. If you all be able to read the handwriting on the wall, where does all that come from? That comes from the story right here.
Yeah.
The handwriting on the wall.
But
So
I'm going to say, if I saw a detached hand writing on the wall, I'm going to think somebody's put something in my drink.
let's set the let's set the stage a little bit. It's always the background that's interesting. So Belshazzar, who is the son and or probably actually grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. It's always a thing. Nebuchadnezzar was, read chapter 4, chapter 2 and chapter 4. We didn't get to chapter 4. But there's one of the great questions that I have, about Nebuchadnezzar is, did he truly convert? Because chapter 4 will seem like a conversion statement. Chapter 2 that we just read kind of seems like a little bit of a conversion statement. Chapter 4 seems like even much more conversion statement. So it's kind of thing, that you ask yourself, am I going to see this dude in heaven? And we don't know the answer to that question. Some people say it was just kind of a conversion of, that he really recognized it, but it wasn't a true conversion. Some people say, so I don't know. Look at chapter 4. It's kind of hard to think that a lost person could make this statement and everything. Clearly, this is way before Christ. But anyway, so he goes the way of all flesh. He dies, and no matter how great you are, and actually,
How did he die?
I don't remember Nebuchadnezzar dying in battle. I think he probably just died of old age and stuff.
So did he go sort of mad like a animal?
Oh,
and
he did have that, but he had that before he died.
But I mean,
and that's,
but then he was back straight
Yeah.
when he was making the statement about, I do recognize.
And I'll probably add this for everybody that's listening, is that Nebuchadnezzar went crazy for a period of 7 years. And then he came back at his empire. Who do you think held his empire together for 7 years?
Daniel?
Yep. And it's really a testimony to Daniel. Daniel was a
But
trusted.
Daniel knew what was happening. He told him.
Yeah, he told him. Yeah, and Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, he said, this is what's going to happen to you, like it or not.
And Daniel was in part of the fulfillment of that prophecy too, and holding the empire together. So anyway, his grandson, it's probably his grandson. He calls him your father, but it's probably, it's not unusual in the Bible to use terms skip generations with a father son. So a lot of times a father, son can be considered a grandson actually. So anyway, Belshazzar is there, and they're actually being sieged by the Medes and the Persians. And he's having this great feast, and you guys, why are you in this feast? He was impenetrable inside the great walls of Babylon and stuff and all this kind of stuff. So anyway, he gets drunk, and, they're having this drunken party. And so he decides to do something really sacrilegious. He said, go bring the stuff that we took from the temple in Jerusalem, the cups and the things, and all that we use in sacrifice worship, and let's drink wine to our gods out of those things, out of those implements that we stole from the temple in Jerusalem when we destroyed it. Bad move. So anyway, they come in the middle of his impious feast, and they're drinking and getting drunk off these, and they're using the furnishings and the implements that were used in the worship of the true God in the temple in Jerusalem. Well, anyway, so kind of like Sennacherib, a couple hundred years earlier when he was besieging Jerusalem, God basically says, now you've got my attention. And so a hand appears on the wall. And so what did Belshazzar do when he saw the handwriting on the wall? Read 4, 5, 6, and 7, if you would.
His face grew pale.
And his knees were knocking.
Yeah.
They drank wine and praised the gods of gold, silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand and on the plaster of the wall in the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring in the conjurers of Chaldeans, of the Chaldeans and the diviners. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me shall be clothed with purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have the authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. That's a pretty good incentive.
Yeah, so anyway, he calls in all the Chaldeans and the soothsayers and everybody. Well, again, nobody can interpret it. The queen, who, probably the queen may have been Nebuchadnezzar's wife, who Nebuchadnezzar died earlier, his wife, comes in and says, your father, the king, knew a man who could interpret these, and go get him. So they go get Daniel and said, if you can interpret these things, I'll give you the gold, the necklace, a scepter, and the purple robe, and I'll make you a second in command. And Daniel says,
I'll tell you, keep your stuff.
keep your stuff, keep your gifts. But I will tell you, like you said, you got it. There you go. So what did he say? Read 24 through 25 through 27, if you would.
Now this is the inscription that he read out. Oh man,
Mini?
many Tikel,
Yep.
Upharsin.
A parson? Yes.
Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Meaning, God has numbered your kingdom to put it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found deficient. Pierce, your kingdom is divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave orders and clothed Daniel with purple to put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the third ruler in the kingdom.
Okay. So.
Which didn't mean anything by the end of the night.
No, it didn't mean anything at the end of the night. No. Because, so anyway, many tekel up Sharan, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. You've come up short, and your kingdom has now been divided between the Medes and the Persians. So,
why is that a different word? It says upversion, and then in the explanation it says peresh or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. So that's interesting, though. It really is. And so I don't know the answer to that question. It could have been that he is going back and forth between two languages there. Is I think maybe what is going on. Daniel's a smart guy. He is a smart guy. So so Daniel could have been writing in two languages there. He could have been writing in now. Let me say something about the book of Daniel and its writing that's interesting, is that several chapters of Daniel are written in Aramaic. 6 chapters of Daniel are written in Aramaic. So it's a very fascinating, I'm not getting into all that tonight, very fascinating. And then chapter 4 seems to be Nebuchadnezzar writing in his own hand there. So there's a lot of things going on with the language there. Anyway, but let's get to the point of kind of what happened. So, you've been found, weighed the balances and found wanting. So anyway, what happened that night was the Medes and the Persians had been sieging for some time the city of Babylon, which that's about, what a sorry leader Belshazzar is. I mean, you're under siege and you're having a party. Come on. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar would have never done that. I mean, he would have been, if there was a battle to fight, he would have been fighting it. This is just a spoiled punk kid. I mean, it kind of reminds me of some of our leaders in Washington.
I was about to say, look, it doesn't take very many generations away from a war to have punks in leadership.
Yeah, I mean, it really doesn't. If you look at Washington today, that's kind of what it looks like. It reminds you of, come on. Nebuchadnezzar would have had on the walls. He'd have been rallying the troops. He'd have been doing all kinds of stuff. And, instead, Belshazzar is getting drunk and having an orgy. I mean, it's pretty despicable
They're
leadership.
complacent. They think it's just going to be okay.
Yeah. And so, anyway, so what happened that very night is given the Medes and Persians. What happens is the Medes and the Persians, and I think the Medes primarily here, had the Euphrates River kind of flows through Babylon. So you kind of have this tremendous, it's a moat, it's like a river flowing, departed and flowing around the city and stuff. So it really was, and between the walls and the river, you had this real sense of just impenetrability. But anyway, this is pretty amazing what they did. They dug a giant hole, the bed of a lake out in the desert, and they diverted the water in from the Euphrates River into this big hole, and what that did was cause the water level to drop drastically. I don't think it necessarily dried up. The water level to drop drastically, and so the Medes burrowed in under the wall, didn't go over it, and came in that night. I'm sure they opened the gates when they got a certain amount of them in there, and so that night the Medes, the Persians come in, and Babylon is no more. Babylon fell in one night. I mean, it's pretty stunning end to. Let me ask you this question: do you think when the end comes for great empires, it often takes place in a hurry? Yeah, and Babylon had weakened internally, just like America. And do you think when America's time comes, you think it'll be a sudden, kind of remember 9/11? I mean, what happened in that day and everything? And so anyway, it's just an amazing story, an amazing, amazing story. So
I think it'll be fast, but we'll look back and see all the warning signs.
Yep. It's amazing that you mentioned that, because I was thinking that very thing the other day is like, when it happens, I can see everybody, like the 10 reasons for the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. I can see the 10 reasons. It's actually really, really amazing. I was, of all things, I was listening to some philosophy last night, and Aristotle hated the idea of a government getting subsidies to people to do nothing, because it creates just a wanton class that does absolutely nothing. I mean, it's like, you think of these things, these philosophers are supposed to be the smartest men. They ought to give these things to people in Washington to read. I mean, these morons up there, it's just unbelievable, And it's kind of interesting. Well, we did not finish, Daniel, but that's probably about as far as we can go tonight. So thank you so much, Shay, and thank you so much, Austin, and God bless. And read the Bible. It is the most fascinating book in the world to read. Amen.